Hey, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are based out of. Welcome to the webinar today. I'm Nagesh Reddy, Senior Solution Architect at Cubol, and today we would be covering cost-efficient data pipelines. So there were various aspects in data pipelines. Let's look at the agenda. What's relevant, basically from a data pipeline, and what it takes to kind of optimize those. Okay, so uh, these are the three things that we would be covering. One is basically how do you optimize and what are the various aspects of cost saving. So when you talk about any optimization of data pipelines, you have two aspects to it. One is data processing and the second is storage. We will talk about those in the next few slides. Then effectively managing the workloads. So it involves both the infra part of it as well as the administration, making sure that we are using resources effectively by auto scaling and making sure that we use spot instances, specifically in case of AWS, to make sure that we keep our cost low. And finally, data basically monitoring of the infrastructure that you have, like clusters or storage. And second is the data lifecycle management to make sure that again you keep your cost low. I'll probably use this word cost efficiency and keeping the cost low numerous times in this presentation, because that's what this presentation is all about. The webinar is all about. So just before getting started with actual content, I just like to quickly take you through Cubol, what Cubol is, what are the facts of Cubol. So Cubol was started in 2011, and when it started, it was a data platform, and it was basically natively to cloud. Yeah, it was built all on open source, and apart from that, uh, all the founders were basically contributed to open source. Yeah. Now, uh, the second aspect is basically where is Cubol kind of operating. Cubol is operating pretty much in all the verticals, all the domains that you can see. Maybe it's fintech, it could be industrial, financial, banking, and all the aspects of it. Yeah, you're pretty much everywhere. And of course, not only limited to one specific region per se, we are pretty much an entire globe. Yeah. Now, one of our Cubol's focus is making sure that customer comes first, and we make sure that customer saves money when there's a cost efficiency when they move to Cubol. So we have helped save customers more than 600 odd million in the last few years that we have been operational for. Uh, we have been processing more than an exabyte of data monthly, and it's growing. It's growing every day, every month. Yeah, and then we have a global presence to make sure that our customers are catered to and have a 24/7 support. And then finally, employees, we have a very strong tech team with a wealth of data experience. Yeah. Now, Cubol is a data platform, as we spoke about now, but who uses Cubol basically? What are the users or personas that uses Cubol? Yeah? It's if you look at data platforms, yeah, every data platform is created keeping a certain persona in mind, and say it could be a data engineers or data scientist, which is more uh, tech driven. The other side is basically keeping in mind the business users, let's say executives and business users, data analysts. But Cubol is something which can cater to all your personas, basically a data engineer and a data scientist, or more from a tech side. Uh, who can create their data pipelines, their models, doing the deployment, doing all the cleansing activities, or all the various steps which are required for a data science activity. Those can be done with Cubol. And then if you look at the business side of it, it can cater to business executives who looks at their daily trends, dashboards, look at dashboards and other aspects to make sure make decisions for their businesses. And similarly, data analysts who can write the SQL queries, they can come on to Cubol, write the SQL queries on the data warehouse, which is backed by Presto. They can do that. So if you see, Cubol is something which is used across the organization with all the data personas that are available in the organization. Now, since we are talking about cost-efficient data pipelines in this webinar, let's quickly go through what are the facts. Yeah, what are basically data pipelines, and what are the impacts and for the business, and what are the challenges. Yeah. Now, data pipeline. If since I assume that everybody out here listening on this webinar would know what data pipelines are. Basically, it's an ETL or extract, transform, or load, or ELT, or so something similar to that. Yeah, basically where you you extract the data from a data sources and then do some transformations and then load to your destinations, basically, correct? The destination or the targets. Now this can have various formats, the various architectural methodologies that can be used, but essentially this is what it is. Now, when you talk about the business impact of it, any data pipeline that is created, it is created from the perspective that you can make real time, you can do a real time analytics and can have data driven decision making. Okay, so it's a huge impact, making sure that data is available as and when it is required. Yeah? Now, what are the challenges in creating data pipelines? Basically, it's scalable. It should be scalable so that it can cater to as business grows, new data comes in, new data sources come in, the data sources increase in volumes, size, and then so it should be scalable. Yeah, that's the first thing. And second is as scales, the cost shouldn't becomes prohibitive, or it should not becomes the ROI. There should be a decent ROI to make sure that you are building these pipelines and you are able to get the value of the data that is being processed. Yeah. So that's second aspect. And then finally, as you start building the various data pipelines, it should not become overly complex. Yeah. And you should have the resources to kind of process that as we spoken from a scalability perspective. Now, again, looking at a step deeper into data pipelines, what's basically the anatomy of data pipelines? Yeah, there are three various components that are involved in data pipeline. You have the high-level components. Those are basically data sources, that processing engines, and data sinks. Yeah, data sinks are basically the targets where you will store the data. Then data flow. Data flow is basically it goes through the transformations, and when you talk about transformations, it is not in a single step transformation happens. It goes through a series of steps. Yeah, that's what data flow would be. And then finally, what are the different type of data pipelines? Yeah, the data pipelines are real time, they are batch, and they are hybrid, which is kind of a lambda kind of architecture where you have both real time as well as batch combined into one single pipeline. So these are the various different type of pipelines, what it includes, and basically the data flow, as you can see in the diagrams as well. Now, when you create pipelines, yeah, one of the important aspects is basically there are a lot of hidden costs, as we spoke about in the first few slides, that there's something that you should be aware of, that it can be cost prohibitive, or it can become the cost can be, it can overrun your budgets. Yeah, but what is that which cause you the cost overruns? Yeah, there are three aspects which we have to look at. It is infra, it is maintenance, it is data transfer fees. Yeah, your data is stored somewhere in your object storage with like S3 or GCS or some of those object storage. Yeah, so when you move the data from there to your processing units, it takes the cloud providers do charge on that. Now, infrastructure maintenance, you have to make sure that you kind of use the infrastructure that has been given to you and within your budgets. And then of course maintenance, the data platform or the tool should not be cost prohibitive, or again, it should not require administration or too many administrators to kind of make sure that they run this overall data platform. So that becomes a cost. It becomes costly affair as you kind of increase your data pipelines, number of data pipelines increases, or as you see more and more, as you see the volume of the data grows. Yeah. Now, talking about what is basically the value of cost efficiency and why you should be looking at it. The first thing is budget constraints, and as we have seen nowadays in today's world, everybody is getting probably budget cuts. That's one. And the second aspect is, even if you don't have budget cuts, you are not of course you are not getting a budget increase. You have to kind of run your data pipelines, the extra data that you're getting in, or the new pipelines that you want to run in some same budget that you might probably had in the last cycle. Yeah, so you have to make sure that you run your data pipelines in that budget constraints. Maximizing your ROI, as I was talking about in the last slide, that you have to make sure that your return on investment is something which is high. You should be able to do more with less, and that's what it is all about. That we spoke about maintenance, where you should not have too many administrators looking after your data pipelines. Yeah, that could be one example where how you can maximize your ROI. And as you kind of start saving on these, making sure that your data pipelines are effective, you can use those funds for the new data experiments. Now, how do you optimize? Yeah. Now, since we spoke about that, now there are, if you see again, we spoke about the various aspects of data pipeline. One of them is basically data processing engine. Choosing an effective data processing engine is something which is imperative to making sure that you have a data processing which is more effective. So Apache Spark is the one which is de facto for data processing as of today. It's used by at least 90% of the organizations, probably who actually deal with data or deal with kind of data processing. Uh, uh, and then it's something which acts both sides. That is one from a developer aspects. You can build your data pipelines faster with Apache Spark with a lot of inbuilt features. At the same time, Apache Spark has got a lot of inbuilt features which can help you which will help you make your data pipelines run faster. Yeah, like the tungsten and various other features which are inbuilt in Apache Spark, which will reduce your overall cost. So Apache Spark is one of the effective or mostly or widely used data processing engine in the industry as of today. Then you have something like data formats. Now, as you store the data, it becomes, again, there are various data formats in which you can store the data. The easiest that you can do is probably use something like a text file or a JSON file, but those are something which are not effective. Yeah, there are various types of data formats that had evolved over a period of time, and one of them which is being used extensively is the Parquet, which has got both compressions as well as when you query the data, it only gets you the data that is required rather than pulling off all the data there. So Parquet is something which is used across industry, and it's one of the effective data storage formats as of today. Uh, Talking about the third aspects now, before just getting into that, Parquet is something which will also make sure that since it is compressed, the data movement that happens from your object storage to your processing units is also reduced. Yeah. Now, talking about just taking that same discussion to the next level, it's about data partitioning. Yeah. Once you have the data in the right data format, the next step is basically how do you kind of organize your data so that you don't query your entire data set, but just query the data which is required for your data analytics. So it could be partitioned with, let's say, a date. If you're creating your transaction or order IDs and something like that, you can create it by date. Yeah. So every day you will have the data accumulated and you can process the data based on the date. And then you have your, or you can do something with a customer ID, user ID, or something like that. Okay, where you can, so based on your query data pattern in the entire organization, you can create some kind of data partitioning where you can limit the amount of the data that will be pulled from the data objects or the data storage per se. So that will help you save cost in both data processing as well as data movement. Now, as we were talking about, first is data storage, before that the processing engine, and finally the third point was how do we kind of make sure that resource management is effective. Yeah. Now, first and foremost is something like using auto scaling and spot instances. So spot instances are something which are provided by AWS at a much lower cost to what an on-demand instances are available for you. So at times it is as cheap, the cost is as low as as 90% of the actual on-demand instances. Yeah, so it can save you a lot of cost, a lot of money basically. Yeah. Now it can be used for critical as well as non-critical, but of course for non-critical where the jobs are basically idempotent, you can rerun your jobs without having any impact on your data. You should be able to use spot instances much more effectively. Or in case or otherwise you should go with something like 50% spot and 50% on demand to make sure that you balance your jobs so that those doesn't get killed. Then we talk about auto scaling because jobs are not something which are even. Yeah, you start with, let's say, 10 instance. You start with processing the data, and as probably a pipeline kind of progresses, it might not require the same kind of hardware. Yeah, each of the steps. Probably the first it might require 100. Let's say, just for the discussion's sake, let's say 100 instances. Probably the next step might just require 40 instances. Yeah, the step after that might require 30 instances. But the step after that, because of some kind of processing, it might require 70 instances. Okay. Now here there is a scope of kind of downscaling and then also upscaling. Of course, it needs to be seen what is the time that it takes for this downscaling and upscaling, and what is the time that it takes for processing. But the idea is to make sure that you use the instances effectively. You don't spin up or kind of run the instances if those are not required for that duration. Yeah. So it has to have a very effective, aggressive auto scaling capability, any of the platforms that you would use. And finally, streamlining data ingestion with tools like Kafka, which will reduce the latency and improve the cost efficiency. And of course, in cloud, you have other options like Kinesis and other things, which will make sure that you have better data ingestion. Now, again, talking about the dynamic resource management, since we spoke about how you can use the various spot instances and auto scaling, but once you have done those, how do you kind of measure that? Yeah, you have to have a continuous monitoring, which will make sure that whatever changes you might have made in terms of using effective spot instances or increasing the percentage of spot instances, and probably the job that you might have, which is auto scaling automatically. You can do that only by monitoring, making sure that you are able to effectively track down which are the jobs which are culprits for higher cost or taking more time, which you can reduce. So that's monitoring is very effective, and as you monitor the jobs and applications, you can then start optimizing it as well. Yeah? Which are built in Cubol, basically the cost explorer, which you can start using it. It will give you suggestions in terms of how you are pulling the data, what could be the possible partitioning partitioning that you should be using so that you can reduce the overall cost. And finally, since we spoke about data storage, the data lifecycle management also comes into play, where you should be retaining only the data which is required. Yeah, let's say if you have compliance requirement which says that you have to have data for 7 years or 5 years, you should have policies to make sure that you can get rid of the data which is not required after those. So at times it might happen that you have ignored those, and the data keeps growing over a period of time, which will incur a lot of cost. Now, what does Qbol has, yeah, in terms of making sure that you have a cost efficient, you can build cost efficient data pipelines. The first is auto scaling, which is a built-in capability. And when Qbol was started in 2011, yeah, that was one of the features that we were looking at, scaling effectively. Yeah. Then, sorry. Then we talk about data lifecycle management. Again, data lifecycle management is something which can be done at both levels, that is at job levels as well as at the cloud level itself, where you can set the policies on the data that is being stored, that is buckets or folders, to make sure the data is kind of cleaned up after certain duration or kind of moved into different buckets, a different type of buckets. Yeah. that you will have. Let's say it moves to a glacier, so that it becomes the cost of storing the data becomes much cheaper. Yeah. Then monitoring, as I was talking about, we have very effective monitoring. Cuball has got very effective monitoring and optimization tools, like Cost Explorer, which will make sure that your data is you kind of continuously monitor as well as kind of optimize and use the optimization steps that it might have provided. That as I gave you an example, that it can tell you which partitions to be used, so which will reduce your overall cost. Now, just a recap of what we have discussed today. So basically, how Cuball actually masters the data pipeline? Yeah, the best practices that we learned, basically what we should be doing to achieve or make sure that the data pipelines are effective. How to kind of make sure that it is scalable, reliable, and cost efficient. How do you reduce the cost, the hidden cost, basically the administration cost, uh, or infra cost? How you can reduce that? And basically advantage of using Cuball, yeah, the same thing. What we are talking about, mastering data pipelines, the best practices, and second aspect is making sure we have the cost efficiency. Those are something which are inbuilt in Cuball by making sure that we have auto scaling to make sure that we reduce our overall cost, and of course using spot instances along with it. So these things are something which are inbuilt, and we are using Apache Spark. As we started saying that, okay, data pipeline, one of the most important aspect is choosing the right tool or engine to process, and Cuball uses Apache Spark to process your data. Okay, now before we kind of move to a quick demo, I would like to show you a quick architecture of Cuball. Now, if you see this diagram, yeah, Cuball has got basically three layers. Yeah, one is the middle layer. The first one, the middle layer is something which is called as Cuball data, Cuball control plane, where you have all these engines which are required for the various personas. I'll talk about that in a second. And then the left side of it, which is basically a Cuball called as Cuball data plane, which has got your data, your processing, everything actually is there in your data plane, which can pull the data from your various application like your enterprise data warehouse. It can pull as well as kind of go back and store into it as and when as it is required from an architectural perspective. Your enterprise business applications like your ERP, your Salesforce, or any of those kind of things. Yeah. Then your streaming. So streaming plus IoT kind of things, Internet of Things, as in today's world, the EVs and connected cars and connected vehicles are becoming a de facto. There's a lot of data which is collected via streaming. Yeah. So any of those basically. Now, just talking about the data plane, your data stays with Cuball. We have made sure that your data stays where it should be. It doesn't move to Cuball, and processing doesn't happen on Cuball per se. Processing is happening on your VPC in virtual private cloud of, let's say, AWS. You will give access to Cuball to manage that, but Cuball doesn't pull the data and kind of process it. And we are multi-cloud, where we can run it on AWS, Azure, or Oracle, or Google, either one of those. Your data is in S3 and your processing will happen on S3, or in case of AWS, and your processing will happen on EC2 instances, which will have the various engines as we'll talk about in the control plane. Now, when we talk about the middle part, which is control plane, Cuball has got basically various tools, again, for various persona, like explore, analyze, more from, and workspaces more from our data analyst perspective, workspaces and notebooks more from data engineering perspective, and data scientist. Notebook is something which is a powerhouse. In case of Cuball, it can be used for both your data engineers who can create your data pipelines, as well as data scientists to create pipelines for your data science activities. So notebook is something which is very important in case of Cuball. And we support both Zeppelin notebooks, which is the uh, which is based on Java and other aspects, which is supported by again community. And we have Jupyter notebooks, which is kind of it's loved by everybody in the data science community and data community per se. Yeah. So that is also available in case of Cubol. And then we have Compose, which makes sure that you can actually have your clusters created based on the requirements that you might have. Dashboards, you can convert your notebooks to read-only dashboards, and then templates and other aspects which are there in Cubol to manage your pipelines. Then let's talk about the various engines. So you might have seen there are various engines which are available in today's world, open source as well as kind of enclosed. Yeah, what we provide is a whole 360 degree where we have processing engine, which is Apache Spark, and then Apache Spark and Apache Hive, and then we have Presto, which is the data warehousing. Of course, you can write your ETL also in Presto, but um, usually it is not done. It is data warehouse that is created on Presto. And Presto being a federated query engine, it can query the data from your, not only from your object storage, which is like S3s, but it can query from relational databases like MySQL or Oracle or Postgres, any of those. Yeah? And then we have Airflow for all the orchestration, because you're building data pipelines, you have to orchestrate your pipelines. So Airflow is available for that. You have TensorFlow for creating your data science workloads. And you can integrate with any third-party data science tools as well. But TensorFlow, like SageMaker. Then you have governance, the security control and governance. Cubol being an enterprise product, security and governance is something which is taken, which is paramount. Yeah. So security is something which is available at, let's say, at notebook level. You might have created a notebook. You want to make sure that it is only accessible to the persons that you want to give access to, so that can be controlled. So the governance is something which is available at a Cubol control plane level, like who can create clusters. Yeah, so even that is something which is available. Now moving out from Cubol control plane, you have data also which is getting stored and which is very important. Correct. Over there we use Apache Ranger to make sure the data is kind of secure for you. And then finally you have the storage, you have done the processing, but how it can be consumed. Yeah, that is what the right side is basically. It's basically for yeah, there are various ways in which you can consume the data. The UI, the Cubol control plane UI itself, where you can write your queries, write your data pipelines, and you can process the data. So Cubol UI is the one. Second is basically the APIs. Cubol has got a rich set of REST APIs which you can integrate with your application. Then we have SDKs, which are Java and Python. So if you want to integrate any of the Cubol features in your pipelines or in your coding, you can do that. Then finally, since we are talking about all data analytics, there would be some of the features which you would like to kind of use your existing BI tools like Looker or Tableau. You can connect to Cubol using ODBC or JDBC connectors from any of these BI tools. And we do connect with open source tools like Redash, Apache Superset. Along with that, ID, since Cubol is part of IDEA, we have Yellowfin for data for BI as well. So that's a high level at how the Cubol architecture looks like. Let's kind of move to a quick demo. So if you see, I have already logged into one of the environments, which is in.cubol.com, and let me do the same thing for, since we are making sure that we cater to GDPR and the various data localization, we have various environments to make sure that we are adhering to those local laws. Yeah? Now, so this was in.cubol.com. Yeah, we have similarly Europe, and then this is your us.cubol.com, the various environments that I spoke about. Yeah. So let's quickly jump to clusters, since we spoke about managing clusters effectively. Sorry, data pipeline. So and part of that is basically making sure that you use data basically the clusters are created effectively in terms of auto scaling. So let's look at that quickly. So let's pick up a Spark cluster. So as I was talking about the various engines that we have Hadoop, Hive, Presto, Spark Streaming, Spark MLflow, and Airflow. Let's pick up a quick thing with Spark. Spark versions you can pick one of those. Then master nodes you can pick up based on your workload. You can pick up those worker node types again based on your workload. You will be able to pick up those. One of the other feature that Kubal has got is using multiple worker nodes. And since we spoke about spot instances and spotters which are like are cost effective by let's say 90%. So those are something which are one not available, not available frequently. That is one, and second is basically even if those are available, since those are since AWS actually says okay, I have these free instances, you can use it, but at the same time it says that okay, if I have something where I require it for the on-demand customers, I'll actually pull it off from you. So in those cases, what we do provide is heterogeneous worker nodes where you can provide number of other instance types which are similar to the one that you're selecting, and based on the internal algorithms that Kubol has, it will try to pick up the instance which is least prone to be preempted, taken back by AWS, and which is easier to acquire as well at the same time. So it uses internal algorithm to make sure that it has got that. Then the minimum worker nodes and the maximum worker nodes. This is effective for your auto scaling. Basically, let's say 10. So it will start with 10, stick to 10, but based on the workloads, it will kind of auto scale up and scale down 2 to 10, between 2 and 10. Then the region on which you want to deploy the clusters, availability zones, and then finally the storage. Yeah, basically what type of storage that you need. You need SS2, GP2, or the various storage types that you require. EBS volume, we have something which is called as EBS upscaling as well to make sure that you can basically upscale your data in case you're running out of your data attached, storage attached to your processing, that is EC2s. Then Bootstrap, any of those customized things that you want to write, you can do it in Bootstrap files. Then disable automatic cluster terminations. I'll talk about that in a second. The one that we are interested in, ideal cluster timeout. So there are so once your job is finished, let's suppose you have numerous jobs which are running. Once those are done, you will say, okay, I have an ideal cluster timeout of 10 minutes. Once it is once those 10 minutes are exhausted, or by default it is 2 hours. Once that time is exhausted, it will kind of kill the cluster. Yeah. So that makes sure that okay, you need not have a person who is looking after the cluster every time. It is taking care automatically. Let's look at composition. Composition talk about what is the on-demand instances, what type of instances that essentially you want to use. Yeah, we have on-demand instances, spot nodes, spot block. Yeah, what are the minimum type of nodes? Usually you would use an on-demand instances for minimum nodes. What are the auto-scaling nodes? Basically, you can use either one of them, and you can say if on-demand is not, sorry, if you are selecting spot instances, and if spot are not available, in that case, what needs to be done? So it's basically fall back onto on-demand instances. And this is the percentage. As I said, spot instance percentage have to be selected. The selection of spot instances is something which is a bit tricky, but 50 is something which is something which is very it's well tested. It makes sure that okay, your job is not killed, but you can make it to 100. We have seen customers moving to 100, but in cases where the job can be idempotent and is not changing any behavior of the data, or it is not where you can overwrite the data or recreate the data, in those cases you can use those. This is basically the pricing, the request timeout, and keyboard placements. And advanced configurations, again talking about it covers a lot of security aspects. It does include the various aspects of like VPC subnets and other aspects. It does cover those. Yeah. Okay, and I'll probably not cover all these where it is talking about Hadoop, it is talking about Spark and other areas, yeah, other configurations. But yeah, you can make any of these configurations which are related to your yarn and other stuff. Okay, let's quickly cover the other tools that we have. As I was talking about, that Cobol covers various personas, yeah. So you have Explore, Analyze, Workbench, Smart Query, and Templates. Yeah, these are the various engines that are available for you. And then you have notebooks, and in notebooks, in case of notebooks, you have both, that is Jupyter as well as Zeppelin notebooks. I'll quickly show you those. So this is your Zeppelin notebooks. Okay, so let me go here. So this is your Zeppelin notebook. You can write your queries. These are data for Delta. You can write any of those. Um, it can help you write your Scala or Python-based application or ETL or data science activities. So if you see your examples, so if I go to examples, okay, so you can see we can create visualization-based jobs, Spark SQL, PySpark, machine learning, and various other aspects of it. So pretty much, as I said, data notebooks are something which are powerhouse in case of Cobol. It can cater to all these the various requirements that you have, from data creating a data pipelines to machine learning. So any of those can be done using notebooks. So I was showing you the Zeppelin notebooks, but similarly you have Jupyter notebooks. Okay, so I'll pause here, and we'll probably take any queries that might come along the way. Okay, so one of the query that came up is basically uh, how do you kind of optimize Cobol pipelines in case of Cobol, like streaming pipelines? Yeah. Yeah. So Cobol has got something called as data pipelines, Cobol pipelines, which can be used to kind of create. So notebooks and all those things are something where you have to write a lot of code and other aspects, but you can use these pipelines to create assisted pipelines. Yeah. So you can, let's say, a demo. Let me create a quick demo pipeline. So it has got the various aspects. Source sync, you can select your source, you can select what is the input format, basically what is the schema that is required, uh, and then finally there is a sync, which is where you want to kind of store the data. Usually it is Kafka, usually it is, let's say, an object storage or Hive or a Snowflake you can use, or you can create your own. Basically, and then set properties, and then finally the assisted code. So where you can create the various operators that we have, like select, filter, aggregation, and watermarks. With just drag and drop, you can create a nice pipeline, and this is really quick. And again, this helps you in creating an pipelines really fast. Okay, let me see if we have more queries. So one of the other question was basically is Cubal something which is supporting all the vendors? Yes, we do. All the cloud vendors, basically, yeah, we do support. We do support all the three as in the architecture diagram you can see over here. We do support like AWS, Azure, Oracle, and Google. And I think one of the questions is about pricing. You can go ahead and search on basic, just Google CUBOL pricing. It will have pricing, but essentially CUBOL is based on usage-based pricing, where the pricing is based on the time that you have used for certain instance, and it will be charged based on that. So let's say suppose you use N54X large, the time, and use it for an hour, there would be a QCU, that is Quball compute unit, against it. And that Quball compute unit, one Quball compute unit, a standard price is something which would be listed on the Quball website. Okay, let's see if we have more queries, else we will call it a day. Thanks everybody for joining in today. It was really great to go through this webinar today, and I hope that you might have learned and probably understood what it takes to make sure that you have an effective pipeline and make sure that you don't overrun your costs. Yeah? Thanks a lot.